Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the bleeding and seepage of the globalist corrupt payments and crony system that we see in the US government. So the US government distributing money through this vast network of NGOs and NGOs to other NGOs and so on, to the tune of trillions of dollars, to try and obscure sort of what money went where and for what purpose. They're trying to make up the story. Well, this is only to help little children, starving little children in Africa, when in fact very little of that is going to any worthwhile purpose. Most of it is going to the globalist purpose of undermining the democratic process, undermining the rule of law, actively aiding and abetting the social or destruction of social cohesion and social trust in particularly white Western countries, aggressively pushing LGBTQ and race and gender, grifting and hustling, that sort of stuff. Now, we just need to understand that's sort of the government side of it, if you like, that currently DOGE in the United States is looking at. And it seems they're on target to uncover direct waste and corrupt payments, undermining of other governments, this sort of thing. They're probably going to uncover somewhere between $2 and $4 trillion of waste. Effectively, the US, being the largest economy of the world, was taken over by the globalists. And the US economy was used as a blunt instrument to force not with the agreement of, but force globalization on the rest of the world. And that's a mixture of trade deals, corrupt payments, under the table payments, all sort of cronyism. It's the whole, every and all devices that used to corrupt any public institution or private institution for that matter was used by the globalists, and they went about it with great gusto and achieved a lot. I mean, they almost were successful. If it wasn't for Donald Trump, then they would have, I think, been quite successful. And it just given the stakes that we're looking at through DOGE, the trillions of dollars of corruption that were going on, the mass subversion of foreign governments. Then you can see why they were absolutely losing their minds about stopping him from getting in, because they knew this would, some or all of it would be uncovered, and you can see why they easily, assassination was on the table, and the hyperbolic hysteria of how he's literally Hitler and all. So it just shows how fearful they were that he would get into public office, and of course they're paying the price for that now, and justifiably so. But that's government. What I wanted to talk about in this presentation was about how that mentality of corruption and subversion and cronyism has bled into the private sector. The US government needed quite a lot of private sector cooperation, and in order to push global, they needed the big companies to say, "Hey, we're on board with." Gay, lesbian, this, and we're on board with affirmative action, and we quotas and race and gender and all this stuff. Now, hitherto that had been sort of governments and charities, but now they needed, or at the next step, they had to, as they saw it, the globalist cabal saw it, they had to co-opt large swathes of what previously had been the private sector. Now, cronyism has always gone on, and corruption has always gone on. But it was moving into a scale that hitherto was unimaginable in order to create this globalist cabal control and to impose the globalist system on unwilling people who'd never voted for it, never agreed to it, and who, if they knew what was going on, would never subscribe to it. So they had to impose it through all sorts of underhanded, backdoor means, and part of that was to co-opt the private sector. So when you look at it, and just consider this for a minute, not a single media outlet across the Western world, as in the so-called mainstream legacy, not one could survive without government handouts, sometimes the government bankrolling the entire business. Now, whether that bankrolling goes through some direct grants, some from George Soros or some from NGOs, or it doesn't matter, but it's still being bankrolled by the money looted from the taxpayer without the taxpayer's consent or agreement, or knowledge for that matter. So not to just consider this, not one media outlet would survive without government handouts. Now, some of the online media, the new media ones, on social media, they would survive, but none of the legacy media would. So the CNNs, the MSNBCs, the BBC in Britain, the ABC in Australia, ABC in the United States, CBC in Canada, none of them would survive, and others, and all the other legs, none of them would survive without government handouts. And again, it's in many cases being 100% bankrolled by the government. And yet these are all the places that are super pro-globalization. These are the places that aggressively and relentlessly push race, gender, and LGBTQ, trans hustling, and grifting, and so on. So the entire media sector is a globalist, is kept on life support by globalist payments. I would argue corrupt payments. So that's the private sector, or even the parts of the media that are the public sector, such as government-owned media outlets. Then we look at, let's say, banks. And now in most countries, banks, and particularly things like merchant banks and so on, most of these banks are protected by the government. They're given, cartel pricing power. They're too big to fail. So if they make bad commercial decisions, then the taxpayer will bail them out. While at the same time, their profits, when they make them, to be kept privately and dispersed amongst a small elite group of executives who are paid gazillion-dollar salaries for working in an environment where they can't. It's impossible for them to lose money. 99% of the time. These people are just. They're making a lot of money, and they face almost zero risk. So cronyism has crept into there, where risk is low and rewards are high and prestige is great. Cronyism will always run rampant, and as it does there. Now, if you look at the amount of children of senior politicians and senior globalist goons and so on that are employed in finance, then it'll give you an idea. In some cases, particularly politicians that are in key positions, all their children are being given gazillion-dollar jobs in finance where they do nothing other than swan around looking important and collecting huge paychecks. So the financial sector is very much being co-opted into, and in return, the financial sector, well, you've got to hire a lot of black lesbians, you've got to have a lot of trans people on your board of directors and so on. So there's a lot of window dressing as they push the LGBT or the race, gender, grift and hustling, affirmative action, mass migration. It's all so they create vast numbers of jobs for people who do nothing, and then talk about how how race and gender balanced they are, and we're good guys. We got lots of black lesbians at our place, and so on. So the financial sector. Then we look at like the big international consulting firms, and they've also been completely co-opted. They're used as fronts for really mass labour hire. So governments around the world have, as indeed USAID does, the governments around the world have, Western world have tens of thousands of consultants. Now, what they do, no one quite knows. If you talk to them, they don't know what they do. And I've spoken to some of these consultants. What do you do, Billy? Well, fuck, I don't know. And they're handsomely paid, though. They brought in from all over the world. They dress in brand name, brand label clothing, and they look very important and self-important and so on as they swan around. But they don't seem to know what they do or care. The prestige is the issue here, and they have a high-paid job. They dress again in designer label clothes, and hey, that's all that matters at the end of the day. So there's many thousands of these, and you look at say USAID is a case in point in the United States. They employed, I think, 5,000 plus consultants on the pay. This is aside from the employees, the direct employees. So they've got thousands of consultants. And what do these consultants do? Well, nobody knows. But gee, they consume vast sums of money. They've got lots of travel and lots of and again, cronyism sort of seeps into that. No accountability, vast sums of money. Cronyism is inevitable in that sort of thing. So friends and relatives of friends and concubines and mistresses, they're all well rewarded there. So that's the large consulting firms, and you know their names. There's I don't know 3, 4, 5, whatever across the world, and they do very, very well out of this, and they're paid and given vast. For example, we need 10,000 workers to do what? Well, we don't know, and so they're paid handsomely. The government pays the consulting firm for supplying these people, and the consulting firm then makes 25-30% on top of that. And we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars being transacted, again, being looted from the taxpayer. But that brings these big consulting firms in. So they talk about affirmative action and trans rights. And we've got a special trans rights department in our company. We're good people, not like those fascists over there. So they're drawn in. Now, so we've got the entire media establishment, the pretty much the entire financial establishment, and we've now also got the big consulting, advisory, and accounting firms. They're also drawn into it. Then we look at the other sort of big players in the big money movers in the game, where they also have a vast array of if you want to win a contract, a government contract, you have to say, well, we employ thousands of black lesbians. Well, you can have the contract there. So in return for this, but then, the government insists, or the globalists insist through the government, you have to employ lots of people. Look, as long as they're non-male and non-white and so on, you're good to go. That's what we want. We want serious, heavyweight, aggressive window dressing on racial equity and gender equity, all this sort of stuff. And so the companies, hey, we can't make money if we do that. Not a problem. We'll just make sure you win all the government contracts you bid for, and you can bid at double, triple, quadruple the competitive price that otherwise we pay. And we'll just loot the taxpayer to pay you your extra while you do all this window dressing. So pretty much any company or business that wins and survives on, or most of their business comes from government contracts, is required to do this. But in return, they're allowed to. They don't win. They don't meritoriously win any contracts. They're just awarded these contracts in return for delivering window dressing outcomes for the globalist cabal. So again, the taxpayer is being looted here. But none of these businesses are actually meritoriously existing or surviving or delivering meritorious outcomes to the government and hence the taxpayer. So once you start going through all this, and so how much of the economy in any Western country now is actually delivering competitive goods and services to the public, you're hard pressed to find them. The little manufacturing company out in the outer suburbs that employs 50 people, and that's the last vestige of a competitive market-driven economy. You just don't see it elsewhere. It doesn't exist. It's been emasculated by the globalist cabal, and again, all done. So what we're seeing here is a complete bleeding of the corruption and the waste and the globalist sort of influencing type machine that's been that DOGE is uncovering. That's now across, or has been for some years now, across vast swathes of the private sector, and that also needs to be unwound, and the consequences of that will be, I think, considerable. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.